What would you do if the person you trusted most in the world turned out to be lying to protect you from something worse than prison? If you're ready to see justice with a heart, hit that like button right now. Judge Caroline Morrison had seen thousands of cases in her 23 years on the bench, but nothing prepared her for what she was about to uncover in Courtroom 4B that Tuesday morning. Drop a comment below telling us what you would do in this situation. The defendant standing before her looked broken. 34-year-old Sarah Chen trembled as she gripped the edge of the defense table, her knuckles white against the dark wood. She wore a faded Target blouse that had seen better days and jeans that hung loose on her frame, suggesting recent weight loss. Her public defender, Marcus Webb, a tired man in a rumpled Brooks Brothers suit, had just advised her to accept the plea deal. 18 months in county jail for felony child endangerment. She'd be out in 10 months with good behavior. Subscribe if you believe every story deserves to be fully heard before judgment is passed. But Judge Morrison held up her hand before Sarah could speak the words that would seal her fate. Something wasn't right. In 2 decades of watching defendants, you develop an instinct. Some people radiate guilt. Others project defiance. Sarah Chen radiated something else entirely. Desperation mixed with an odd sort of relief, like someone about to confess to a crime they didn't commit just to end their suffering. The charges were serious. On March 15, 2024, Sarah's 7-year-old daughter, Emma, had been found alone in their apartment for 3 consecutive days while Sarah was allegedly out partying. A neighbor, Dorothy Weston, had called 911 after hearing the child crying through the thin walls of the Pine Grove apartments on Westheimer Road. When Child Protective Services arrived, they found Emma dehydrated, hungry, and sleeping in a bathtub because she'd been too scared to sleep in her bed. The apartment was a disaster. Empty pizza boxes, spoiled milk, a gas stove left on but not lit. "Ms. Chen," Judge Morrison said, her voice carrying the weight of authority tempered with something unexpected, genuine curiosity. "Before I accept this plea, I need to ask you something. Look at me." Sarah slowly raised her eyes. They were red-rimmed and hollow, the eyes of someone who hadn't slept in weeks, or someone carrying a secret so heavy it was crushing them from the inside out. "Where were you during those 3 days?" the judge asked. The prosecution had already answered this question in their filing. According to witness statements, Sarah had been seen at Murphy's Bar on 2 of those nights. Security footage showed someone matching her description getting into an Uber at 2 a.m. Her phone record showed she'd been active, texting, scrolling through social media. The evidence seemed clear-cut. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in the power of truth. "I was." Sarah started, then stopped. Her attorney touched her arm, a clear signal to stay quiet and just accept the plea. But Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Ms. Chen, I'm going to tell you something unusual. I've reviewed your case file 3 times. You have no prior record, not even a parking ticket. Your daughter's school records show you attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every vaccination appointment. Her pediatrician describes you as perhaps the most attentive mother in the practice. Your employer at Memorial Hermann Hospital, where you work as a night shift nurse, says you've never missed a shift in 4 years. You picked up extra shifts when coworkers needed coverage. You donated to the hospital's Family Assistance Fund every paycheck." The courtroom was silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her fingers hovering over the keys. "So I'm going to ask you again," Judge Morrison continued. "And this time, I want the truth. Not what your attorney coached you to say. Not what you think will make this go faster. The truth. Where were you?" Quote, "Hit that subscribe button because what happens next will restore your faith in the justice system." Sarah's lips trembled. A tear rolled down her cheek, then another. Her whole body began to shake. Marcus Webb stood up quickly. "Your Honor, my client has agreed to accept the plea deal as offered by the state. We don't need to prolong these proceedings." "Sit down, Mr. Webb," Judge Morrison said, not unkindly. "I'm not satisfied with the facts as presented. Ms. Chen, I'm giving you a direct order as an officer of this court. Tell me where you were." The prosecutor, a young, ambitious woman named Jennifer Salazar in a sharp theory pantsuit, stood up. "Your Honor, the defendant's location has been established by multiple witnesses and physical evidence. The state has met its burden. I haven't accepted the plea yet, Ms. Salazar, which means we're still in my courtroom operating under my discretion. And my discretion says something doesn't add up." Judge Morrison turned back to Sarah. "Last chance, Ms. Chen. Like this video if you believe judges should trust their instincts." Sarah Chen broke. It started as a sob, then became a wail that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal. She collapsed into her chair, her hands covering her face. The bailiff, a grandfather of 5 named Robert Torres, instinctively moved forward, but Judge Morrison shook her head slightly. "Let this play out." When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was at MD Anderson Cancer Center. I was receiving emergency chemotherapy." The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison's gavel came down 3 times. "Order! Order in this court!" Quote. Jennifer Salazar was already flipping through her files frantically. This wasn't in any of the discovery. Marcus Webb looked like he'd been struck by lightning, his mouth hanging open. In the gallery, Dorothy Weston, the neighbor who'd called CPS, gasped audibly and brought her hand to her mouth. "Chemotherapy?" Judge Morrison repeated. "Explain. Now. Everything. Drop a comment telling us if you saw this twist coming." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving mascara streaks across her cheeks. "I was diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer in January. They gave me a 15% chance of survival. Maybe less. The tumor was aggressive. They needed to start treatment immediately, but I'm a single mother. I have no family in Houston. Emma's father died in a car accident when she was 2. My parents are gone. I have no siblings." She took a shuddering breath, and the courtroom held its collective breath with her. "The treatment protocol required me to be hospitalized for 72 hours straight. 3 days of continuous chemotherapy cocktails because the tumor was wrapping around my pancreatic duct and they needed to shrink it before surgery. It was that or die within 6 months. They told me I couldn't leave, couldn't even walk around. The drugs they were giving me, they said if I disconnected from the IV, it could cause a cardiac episode." Judge Morrison's expression had shifted from stern to something else, something that looked like dawning horror. "And your daughter?" Quote. "I tried everything," Sarah said, her voice breaking again. "I called every friend I had, but most of them had moved away, or we'd lost touch because I worked nights and slept days. I called the hospital social services, but they said emergency childcare assistants had a 2-week waiting period. I called churches, community centers, everyone. No one could help on 3 days' notice. I was supposed to start treatment on a Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. She looked directly at Judge Morrison now, and there was something fierce in her eyes despite the tears. "So I did what I thought I had to do. I stocked the apartment with food that Emma knew how to prepare. Sandwiches, juice boxes, fruit, crackers, cookies. I showed her how to use the microwave for the mac and cheese cups. I left the tablet charged and set up with her favorite shows and learning apps. I told her Mommy had to go to work for a few days at the hospital, but that I'd call her every single day, which I did. 3 times a day, every day. I checked in on the apartment's security camera feed from my hospital bed between chemo sessions. Share this with anyone who's ever had to make an impossible choice." "The stove," Jennifer Salazar interjected, her voice less confident now. "The reports said you left the gas on." "I didn't," Sarah said firmly. "I checked that stove 5 times before I left. Emma knows she's not allowed to touch it. She must have tried to cook something after I was already gone, got scared, and turned it off wrong. The camera system I set up, it was just my old iPhone propped on a shelf. The battery died on the 2nd day. That's why I didn't see when things started to go wrong." Marcus Webb had found his voice. "Your Honor, why wasn't I told about any of this?" Quote. Sarah turned to her attorney with something like pity in her eyes. "Because I was protecting someone, and I thought if I just took the plea deal, it would all be over and Emma could go back to her life." "Protecting who?" Judge Morrison demanded. "My daughter," Sarah whispered. "From knowing her mother has cancer, from knowing I might die, from being put in foster care while I'm sick. If I went to jail, at least she'd be with a foster family temporarily, with the understanding I'd get her back in 10 months. But if I tell everyone I have cancer and might die, if I tell them I can't care for her because I'm about to go through 6 months of aggressive treatment, they take her permanently. They put her up for adoption. A 7-year-old girl loses her mother to the system before she loses her to cancer. If this doesn't break your heart, check if you still have one. Hit that like button. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in Courtroom 4B. Judge Morrison sat back in her chair, and for the first time in her career, she felt tears threatening to form. She blinked them away, maintaining her composure, but everyone in that room had just felt the weight of an impossible situation crash down on them. Robert Torres, the bailiff, wiped at his own eyes quickly, pretending to adjust his glasses. In the gallery, at least 6 people were crying openly. Dorothy Weston, the neighbor, looked stricken, her face pale as she realized the full scope of what she'd set in motion with her call to authorities. "Your Honor," Jennifer Salazar said quietly, and for the first time since the hearing started, she didn't sound like a prosecutor. She sounded like a human being. "I'd like to request a 30-minute recess to make some phone calls and review additional information." "Denied," Judge Morrison said. "We're going to sort this out right now. Ms. Chen, do you have any documentation of your diagnosis and treatment?" Quote, "I didn't bring it," Sarah said. "I was just supposed to plead guilty and go to jail. I didn't think it mattered." Subscribe right now because you won't believe how this judge solves this impossible situation. Judge Morrison turned to her clerk, Patricia Nguyen, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd been with her for 12 years. "Patricia, I need you to call MD Anderson Cancer Center right now. Patient named Sarah Chen. Admission dates March 12th through March 15th, 2024. I want verification of admission, diagnosis, and treatment protocol. HIPAA waiver signed verbally right now, Ms. Chen." "I waive my HIPAA rights," Sarah said immediately. "They can tell you everything." Quote, as Patricia made the call from her desk phone, Judge Morrison continued, "Ms. Salazar, tell me about these witness statements that placed Ms. Chen at a bar." Jennifer flipped through her files. "2 witnesses, Your Honor. One was a bartender at Murphy's Bar who said he saw someone matching the defendant's description. The other was a regular patron, a man named Kevin Frost, who was more specific. He said he'd seen Ms. Chen there before and was certain it was her on March 13th and 14th. Did anyone get a positive ID, photos, video?" Quote, "The bar's security footage was recorded over after 30 days, Your Honor. By the time we requested it, it was gone. We had the witness testimony and phone records showing the defendant's phone was active during those periods." Judge Morrison turned to Sarah. "Your phone, where was it?" Quote, "In my hospital room," Sarah said. "Emma knew how to call me on it if she had an emergency. I left it on and checked it constantly between treatments." The texts the prosecution is talking about, those were to Emma, asking if she'd eaten, if she was okay, telling her I loved her. "I was on social media because I couldn't sleep. The chemo made me so sick, and I was worried sick about Emma, and I was just scrolling through Facebook at 3 in the morning, trying not to think about everything that could go wrong." Drop a comment about the last time you couldn't sleep because you were worried about someone you love. "And the Uber?" Jennifer asked, but her heart wasn't in the question anymore. "I don't use Uber," Sarah said. "I take the bus, or I drive my 2008 Honda Civic. I couldn't afford Uber even if I wanted to. Every penny I had went to copays and Emma's needs." Patricia again hung up the phone. The entire courtroom turned to look at her. She nodded at Judge Morrison. "MD Anderson confirms. Patient Sarah Chen admitted March 12th at 5:47 a.m. for emergency chemotherapy treatment for pancreatic cancer. She was under continuous observation in the oncology ward through March 15th at 2:15 p.m. They have full records of her never leaving the floor. Badge scanners, nursing logs, everything. The treating physician, Dr. Michael Ramirez, is available to testify if needed." The prosecutor sat down slowly, and you could see the case collapsing in real time on her face. Marcus Webb was scribbling notes frantically, probably already planning the wrongful prosecution suit. But Judge Morrison was focused on something else entirely. "Ms. Salazar," the judge said, "these witnesses who placed Ms. Chen at a bar, I want them found and questioned again. Today. Something's not right. Ms. Chen, do you have any idea who could have been at that bar using your identity? Quote. Sarah shook her head, then stopped. A strange expression crossed her face. I have a cousin, sort of, not blood-related. My ex-husband, Emma's father, his brother, married a woman named Sandy Chen before we split. We're not in touch anymore, but people used to say we looked alike. Same height, same hair color, same last name, obviously. I haven't seen her in 4 years, not since Jake's funeral. Share this video if you think this investigation is about to crack wide open. Judge Morrison motioned to Robert Torres, bailiff. Contact HPD and get a detective down here. I want a photo lineup shown to these bar witnesses within the hour. She turned to Jennifer Salazar. Miss Salazar, until we verify the accuracy of your witness identification, I'm not accepting any plea deal. Motion to continue this case for 2 weeks while we sort out the facts. Miss Chen, you're released on your own recognizance. Your Honor, Marcus Webb jumped up. My client has been in custody for 9 days. She needs to be reunited with her daughter immediately. Where is Emma now? Judge Morrison asked. Sarah's voice broke. Foster care, a family in Katy. I haven't seen her since they took her. They said I could have supervised visits, but I was so ashamed. I couldn't face her. I couldn't let her see me like this. Like this video if you believe families belong together. Judge Morrison made a decision that would later be called either the bravest or most controversial of her career. Patricia, contact Child Protective Services. I want an emergency hearing on custody scheduled for this afternoon, 3 p.m. We're going to expedite this. Miss Chen is not a danger to her child. She's a mother who made a desperate choice in an impossible situation. Quote, Your Honor, Jennifer Salazar said carefully, regardless of the circumstances, the child was left alone for 3 days. She was found dehydrated and scared. There are protocols. I'm aware of the protocols, Miss Salazar. I'm also aware that we have a woman who was literally dying and had exhausted every other option. I'm also aware that our system failed her spectacularly. Where was the social worker who could have helped arrange childcare? Where was the emergency assistance? Where was the community safety net that's supposed to catch people in crisis? Judge Morrison's voice had risen, and she caught herself, taking a breath. I'm not dismissing the charges yet. I'm saying we need all the facts before we destroy a family. Am I clear? Quote, Yes, Your Honor, came the chorus from both attorneys. As Sarah Chen was led out of the courtroom by a bailiff to process her release, she turned back to look at Judge Morrison. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, recognition, the acknowledgement that sometimes justice requires more than just following the letter of the law. Subscribe, because this story is just getting started and you won't believe what investigators discover next. In the gallery, Dorothy Weston approached the bailiff. I need to speak to Miss Chen, please. I need to apologize. I had no idea. I just heard crying and I thought... Not now, ma'am, Robert Torres said gently. But I'll make sure she knows you want to talk. As the courtroom cleared, Judge Morrison sat at her bench, reading through the case file again with fresh eyes. What had looked like clear-cut neglect an hour ago now looked like something else entirely. A mother's desperate gamble, a system's failure, and possibly something more sinister. Someone deliberately lying to police to make Sarah look guilty. The question was why? Detective Lisa Park arrived 40 minutes later with a tablet full of photos. She was a 15-year veteran of HPD's Family Violence Division, a woman who'd seen every variation of child endangerment cases. Judge Morrison had worked with her before and trusted her instincts. Your Honor, Detective Park said, setting up in the empty courtroom. I pulled the original witness statements. The bartender, Tommy Rodriguez, was pretty vague. He said, an Asian woman in her 30s, dark hair, came in around 11 p.m. That could be thousands of people in Houston. But Kevin Frost, the regular patron, he was specific. Said he'd seen Sarah Chen there before, knew her name, was sure it was her. Had she been there before? Judge Morrison asked. I pulled credit card records with Ms. Chen's permission. She hasn't been to Murphy's Bar in over 3 years. The last charge was from her husband's wake in 2020. But here's where it gets interesting. Drop a comment if you love when detectives do their jobs right. Detective Park swiped to a new screen. I ran the name Sandy Chen through our database. Sarah's former sister-in-law. She has a record. 2 DUIs, 1 arrest for passing bad checks. And get this, she was arrested at Murphy's Bar last year for drunk and disorderly conduct. She's a regular there. I pulled her DMV photo. She held up the tablet. The resemblance was striking. Sandy Chen and Sarah Chen could have been sisters. Same face shape, same hair length, similar features. In a dark bar after a few drinks, even someone who'd met Sarah before might confuse them. But why would Kevin Frost specifically name Sarah? Judge Morrison asked. That's what I wanted to know, so I did some digging. Kevin Frost works at Memorial Hermann Hospital. Facilities maintenance. Sarah Chen works there as a nurse. They'd know each other, at least by sight, so I called him in for a follow-up interview. And, quote, he admitted he might have been wrong. When I showed him photos of both women side by side, he wasn't sure anymore. Said he'd been drinking that night and it was dark. But here's the thing, Your Honor. He was really nervous. Kept changing his story. Said first he was certain, then maybe not certain, then he didn't want to get anyone in trouble. Classic signs of someone who's hiding something or was pressured to say something specific. Share this with anyone who believes the truth always comes out eventually. Judge Morrison leaned back. Someone wanted Sarah to look guilty, wanted her in jail, but who benefits from that? Quote, I'm still working on it, Detective Park said. But I pulled one more thing. Sandy Chen filed for guardianship of Emma Chen 3 days after Sarah was arrested. She claimed she was the child's closest living relative and that she'd be a better placement than foster care. Quote, the pieces clicked together like a lock opening. Judge Morrison felt a cold fury building in her chest. She wanted the child. She framed Sarah to get her daughter. But why? What's her angle? Quote, still investigating, but I have theories. Emma's father, Jake Chen, had a life insurance policy, $500,000. Beneficiary was Emma, with the payout held in trust until she turns 18. But if Sarah is declared unfit and someone else becomes Emma's guardian, they control that trust fund. They make decisions about how it's spent on Emma's behalf. And there's no oversight once guardianship is transferred. Judge Morrison finished. She could drain that account over the next 11 years and no one would know until Emma turned 18 and there was nothing left. Quote, hit that like button if this makes you as angry as it makes us, Detective Park nodded. I've got units heading to Sandy Chen's last known address right now. We're also going to have another conversation with Kevin Frost about who might have asked him to make a false statement to police. This whole thing is about to unravel. By 3 p.m., Courtroom 4B was packed again, this time for the emergency custody hearing. Sarah Chen sat at the defense table, looking terrified and hopeful in equal measure. She'd been given time to change into clean clothes brought by a hospital co-worker, a simple Target dress and cardigan. Someone had brought her makeup, and she'd done her best to look presentable, but the toll of her illness and incarceration showed in the hollows of her cheeks and the dark circles under her eyes. The CPS caseworker, a weary man named Donald Kemper who'd been doing this job for 20 years, sat with a thick file. Sandy Chen was there too, sitting in the gallery with her attorney, a slick personal injury lawyer named Greg Hutchins, who looked out of his depth in family court. And in the front row, escorted by a foster care specialist, sat Emma Chen. She was small for 7, with long dark hair and pigtails, and wearing a purple Justice hoodie and jeans. The moment she saw her mother, she tried to run to her. The foster specialist gently held her back. Not yet, sweetie. Soon. Mommy! Emma's voice cracked the composure of everyone in the courtroom. Sarah was crying before her daughter even finished the word. Subscribe right now if you think families belong together. Judge Morrison had to wipe her own eyes before calling the hearing to order. We're here to determine the appropriate placement for Emma Chen, age 7. Currently in foster care following her mother Sarah Chen's arrest on child endangerment charges. Mr. Kemper, CPS recommendations, quote, Donald Kemper stood, and his voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd seen too many families destroyed by circumstances. Your Honor, our initial recommendation was to keep Emma in foster care pending resolution of the criminal case. However, in light of new information about Ms. Sarah Chen's medical situation and the circumstances of Emma's temporary neglect, we're revising our recommendation. Ms. Chen has no history of abuse or neglect. Her daughter is healthy, well-adjusted, and bonded strongly to her mother. The incident appears to be a one-time crisis situation rather than a pattern of behavior. What about during the mother's ongoing cancer treatment? Judge Morrison asked. She'll be undergoing chemotherapy for months. She'll be sick, possibly incapacitated. How do we ensure Emma's safety? Quote, "We've been in contact with the hospital social work department," Kemper said. "They're setting up a care plan. There's a program called Chemo Angels that provides childcare assistance for cancer patients. Additionally, several nurses from Memorial Hermann have volunteered to help coordinate coverage. Ms. Chen will have home health care visits 3 times a week. We can monitor the situation closely, but our assessment is that returning Emma to her mother with these supports in place is in the child's best interest." Sandy Chen's attorney shot to his feet. "Your Honor, my client has filed for guardianship. She's family. She's stable, employed, and able to provide full-time care. The child shouldn't be in a situation where her mother might die and leave her traumatized. Drop a comment telling us what you think should happen." Judge Morrison fixed him with a look that had made stronger men wilt. "Mr. Hutchins, sit down. I'm going to address your client directly." Miss Sandy Chen approached the bench. Sandy Chen stood slowly. She was dressed nicely, in Ann Taylor separates that looked new. She walked forward with what might have been confidence or might have been bravado. It was hard to tell. "Ms. Chen," Judge Morrison said, "can you explain why you were at Murphy's Bar on March 13th and 14th? Quote. Sandy's eyes widened. "I wasn't. I don't. That's not relevant to this proceeding. I decide what's relevant. Answer the question." "I may have been there. I don't remember. I go there sometimes." "Do you remember speaking to a man named Kevin Frost? Do you remember telling him to identify you as Sarah Chen if police came asking questions? Do you remember deliberately setting up your former sister-in-law to take the fall for your daughter being alone?" Quote. The courtroom exploded. Greg Hutchins was shouting objections. Sandy was backing away from the bench, her face going from red to white. Sarah Chen had her hand over her mouth in shock. And Emma was looking around in confusion, not understanding what was happening, but sensing the tension. "Like this video if you believe justice is about to be served." "Your Honor," Detective Park called from the back of the courtroom, "I have an arrest warrant." Judge Morrison nodded. "Bailiff, take Ms. Sandy Chen into custody. Charges of filing a false police report, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted custodial interference. Mr. Hutchins, you might want to switch from family law to criminal defense because your client is going to need it." Quote, "As Robert Torres moved to handcuff Sandy Chen, she finally broke. She doesn't deserve that child. Jake was my husband's brother, and she got everything when he died. The insurance money, the house, everything. She's not even going to live to raise Emma. I could give that little girl a real home, a real family. I have 2 kids of my own. I'm stable. She's dying." Quote. The cruelty of the words hung in the air. Emma burst into tears. Sarah looked like she'd been physically struck. And Judge Morrison's face became stone. "Bailiff, get her out of my courtroom," Judge Morrison said quietly, and the quiet was more terrifying than shouting. "And someone take Emma to the conference room until we're done here. She doesn't need to hear this." As Sandy was led away still protesting, as Emma was gently escorted out by a child advocate, the courtroom settled into a heavy silence. Sarah sat at the defense table with tears streaming down her face, and for the first time since this ordeal began, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of rage and grief and relief, all mixed together. Share this with anyone who needs to see that the truth will always win. "Ms. Sarah Chen," Judge Morrison said, and her voice had softened. "I am ordering Emma returned to your custody immediately. I'm also ordering the following. CPS will conduct weekly home visits for the next 6 months. You will accept all offered social services including the Chemo Angels program, home health care, and any other assistance they provide. You will allow Emma's school counselor to meet with her weekly to help her process this situation. and you will keep this court informed of your medical treatment and progress." "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "Thank you, Your Honor." "I'm not done. I'm also ordering the state to investigate why our emergency childcare assistance has a 2-week waiting period. That's unacceptable. If you had been able to access help when you needed it, none of this would have happened. I'm making a formal recommendation that the system be reformed." She looked at Jennifer Salazar. "Ms. Salazar, I assume the state will be dropping all charges against Ms. Chen?" Quote. "Yes, Your Honor," Jennifer said quickly. "We'll file the dismissal today. And I assume the state will be prosecuting the person actually responsible for filing false reports?" Quote. "Absolutely, Your Honor." "Good. Then we're adjourned. Ms. Chen, go get your daughter." What happened next would be talked about in courthouse circles for years. As Sarah Chen stood on shaking legs and walked toward the conference room where Emma waited, every single person in that courtroom stood up. The bailiff, the court reporter, the clerk, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, the CPS caseworker, the gallery full of spectators. They stood in silence as Sarah opened that door and her daughter ran into her arms. Subscribe if you believe in happy endings. The hug lasted 5 full minutes. Emma wrapped her arms around her mother's neck and her legs around her waist and cried like her heart was breaking and healing at the same time. Sarah held her daughter and rocked her and whispered things only Emma could hear. Promises and apologies and love poured out in a stream of words that didn't need an audience. When they finally pulled apart, Emma looked up at her mother with wet eyes. "Mommy, are you sick? That lady said you were dying." And this was the moment. The moment Sarah had been trying to avoid. The moment she'd been willing to go to jail to prevent. But there was no hiding anymore. No more secrets. No more desperate choices made alone in the dark. "Yes, baby," Sarah said, kneeling down to be at eye level with her daughter. "Mommy is sick. I have cancer. Do you know what that is?" Quote. Emma nodded. "My friend Chloe's grandma had cancer. She died." Quote. "Some people with cancer do die," Sarah said, and you could hear in her voice how much this was costing her. "But some people fight really hard, and the doctors help them, and they get better. I'm going to fight really hard, Emma. I'm going to do everything the doctors tell me to do, and I'm going to be here for you for as long as I possibly can." "Promise?" Emma's voice was so small. "I promise to try my hardest," Sarah said, because she wouldn't lie. Not even now. "And I promise that no matter what happens, you will always be loved and safe and cared for. But Emma, I need you to know something. The reason I was gone for those 3 days, I was in the hospital, getting medicine to fight the cancer. I didn't want to leave you alone. I tried so hard to find someone to stay with you, but I had no choice. And I am so sorry you were scared. Drop a comment if this is the hardest conversation a parent can have." Emma thought about this for a long moment. Then she said something that would make Sarah Chen cry for entirely different reasons. "I wasn't that scared, Mommy. I knew you'd come back. You always come back." The simple faith of a child. The unshakable belief that her mother would never truly abandon her. It was a gift Sarah didn't deserve and would spend the rest of her life trying to earn. "I will always come back to you," Sarah said. Always. Judge Morrison watched from the doorway, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt like the system had worked the way it was supposed to. Not perfectly, not without pain, but ultimately, justice had prevailed. A family had been saved. A child had been protected. And a woman who'd tried to game the system for money had been caught. But the story wasn't over. Over the next 6 months, Sarah Chen underwent aggressive chemotherapy. There were days she was too sick to get out of bed. Days when Emma had to be brave beyond her years, bringing her mother water and crackers and sitting quietly beside her doing homework while Sarah slept fitfully on the couch. Days when the volunteers from Chemo Angels came and took Emma to the park or the library or out for ice cream, giving Sarah time to rest and recover. Share this if you believe communities should support each other. The nurses from Memorial Hermann rotated through in an unofficial schedule. Someone always checked in. Someone always made sure there was food in the fridge and that Emma got to school on time. Sarah's coworker, A nurse named Patricia Williams became a regular presence, picking Emma up from school twice a week and helping with homework at her own house while Sarah went to appointments. Donald Kemper from CPS did his weekly visits and watched as Sarah fought for her life and her daughter with equal ferocity. He'd seen a lot of parents in his 2 decades on the job. Some were tragic cases who loved their kids but couldn't get it together. Some were abusers who needed those kids taken away permanently. But Sarah Chen was something else. She was a warrior. On the hard days, when the chemo made her so sick she couldn't eat, she still made sure Emma had breakfast. On the days when her hair fell out in clumps and she cried in the bathroom, she still helped with Emma's math homework. On the days when the pain was so bad she could barely think, she still read Emma bedtime stories in a scratchy whisper. "How do you do it?" Kemper asked her one day during a routine visit. Emma was at school and Sarah was having a rare good day, sitting up and sipping tea. "I don't have a choice," Sarah said simply. "That little girl needs me, so I keep going." Hit that subscribe button if you know a mother's love is the strongest force on earth. The trial of Sandy Chen happened 4 months later. Sarah was too sick to attend, but she submitted a victim impact statement that was read in court. In it, she talked about the betrayal, about how Sandy had not only tried to steal her daughter, but had tried to steal Emma's future, the money Jake had left to make sure his daughter would be okay no matter what happened. "I trusted her," Sarah's statement read. "She was family, and she used the worst moment of my life, when I was fighting for my life and terrified for my daughter, to try to take everything I had left. She didn't care that Emma would lose her mother. She only cared about money she thought she was entitled to. She weaponized the system against me and almost won." Sandy Chen was sentenced to 3 years in prison for the false police reports, conspiracy, and fraud charges. Kevin Frost, the maintenance worker who'd lied for her in exchange for $500 and a promise of more, got 2 years probation and lost his job at the hospital. Judge Morrison attended the sentencing. Afterward, she stood on the courthouse steps and spoke to a local news crew about the case that had changed her perspective on justice. "The system is supposed to protect children," she said, "but sometimes the system becomes a weapon that hurts the people it should be helping. Sarah Chen did nothing wrong. She was a mother facing an impossible choice, and our social safety net failed her so completely that she felt she had no option but to leave her child alone. That's on us. That's on a society that doesn't support parents in crisis. I'm grateful we caught the mistake before it was too late. But how many other parents are out there right now facing impossible choices because they have no help?" Quote, "Like this video if you agree the system needs to change." The interview went viral. Within days, the Texas legislature announced they were reviewing emergency childcare assistance protocols. The 2-week waiting period was reduced to 48 hours. New funding was allocated for crisis childcare. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And it happened because one judge refused to accept a guilty plea that didn't make sense. Month 7 brought news that Sarah had been hoping for but barely dared to believe. Dr. Michael Ramirez called her into his office at MD Anderson with the latest scan results. Emma was at school. Sarah sat alone in the chair across from his desk and prepared herself for the worst. "The tumor's gone," Dr. Ramirez said, and he was smiling. "The chemotherapy worked. The margins are clear. We got it all." Quote, Sarah Chen burst into tears for what felt like the 1,000th time in the past year, but these were different tears. These were joy tears, relief tears, gratitude tears that flowed and flowed until Dr. Ramirez handed her a whole box of tissues and pulled his chair around to sit beside her. "You're not out of the woods," he cautioned gently. "Pancreatic cancer has a high recurrence rate. You'll need regular monitoring, probably for the rest of your life. And there's still a chance it comes back. But right now, today, you're cancer-free. Your body fought hard, Sarah. The treatment worked. You won." "I can tell Emma," Sarah whispered. "I can tell her mommy's going to be okay." "You can tell her mommy's cancer-free right now and fighting to stay that way," Dr. Ramirez corrected. "Don't promise her forever. None of us get that promise. But promise her today. Promise her you're still here. That's enough. Share this with someone who needs hope today. That afternoon, Sarah picked Emma up from school herself for the first time in months. She'd been too sick, too weak, always depending on volunteers and friends to handle the school run. But today she felt strong enough. Today she wanted to see her daughter's face when she walked out those doors. Emma came running, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders, her hair flying. "Mommy, you came!" Quote, "I came," Sarah said, scooping her up, even though Emma was getting too big for scooping. "And I have some news." They went to Emma's favorite park, the one with the big swings and the purple slide. Sarah pushed her daughter on the swings and felt the late afternoon sun on her face and thought about all the days she'd almost missed, all the moments she'd almost lost. "Emma, baby, stop swinging for a minute. I need to tell you something." Emma dragged her feet in the dirt to slow down, then hopped off. She looked at her mother with those serious eyes that had seen too much for a 7-year-old but were still full of hope. "The doctor said my cancer is gone," Sarah said. "I'm better. I'm going to be okay." Emma's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, processing, understanding, and then pure, radiant joy. She threw herself at her mother with such force they both nearly fell over. "You're better! You're really better!" Quote, "I'm really better," Sarah confirmed, holding her daughter close. "I still have to see the doctor a lot to make sure it doesn't come back. And I might get sick again, but right now I'm okay. We're okay. Drop a comment about the last time you got the best news of your life." Mother and daughter sat on a park bench as the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Emma chattered about school, about her friends, about the science project she was doing on butterflies. Normal 7-year-old stuff. The stuff Sarah had been terrified she'd never hear again. "Mommy," Emma asked suddenly, "are you going to get married again?" Quote. The question caught Sarah off guard. "I don't know, honey. Maybe someday." "Why?" Quote. "Because I think you should marry Judge Morrison. She saved us." Sarah laughed, actually laughed, and it felt good. It felt like healing. "I don't think judges can marry people they see in court, baby. But you're right that she saved us. She didn't have to dig deeper. She didn't have to question the plea deal. She could have just accepted it and sent me to jail, and that would have been that. But she trusted her instincts. She believed there was more to the story." "She's a good judge," Emma said solemnly. "She's a very good judge." Subscribe if you believe one person can change everything. 3 weeks later, Sarah Chen stood outside Courtroom 4B, holding a basket of homemade banana bread and a card signed by both her and Emma. She'd called ahead and asked if Judge Morrison had a few minutes. The clerk had said the judge had a break between hearings at 2 p.m. When Patricia Nguyen led Sarah into the judge's chambers, Judge Morrison looked up from her paperwork with surprise. "Ms. Chen, is everything all right?" Quote, "Everything's perfect," Sarah said, and meant it. "I just wanted to thank you, properly. With more than just words said in court." She set the basket on the desk. "I make this bread from my grandmother's recipe," Emma helped. "And we wrote you a card, but honestly, there aren't enough words to express what you did for us. You saved my daughter. You saved our family. You didn't accept the easy answer. You pushed when you could have just moved on to the next case. You saw me as a person, not just a defendant." Judge Morrison stood and came around the desk. For a moment, the formality of judge and defendant fell away. They were just two women who'd been through something profound together. "How are you feeling?" Judge Morrison asked. "Cancer-free," Sarah said, and smiled. "For now, taking it day by day." "That's all any of us can do," Judge Morrison said. "And Emma?" Quote, "She's amazing. Resilient, happy. She had some nightmares for a while, but the school counselor has been wonderful. She's processing everything and doing okay. Kids are tougher than we think." Quote, "They are," Judge Morrison agreed. She looked at the card, at the careful child's handwriting that said, "Thank you for being the best judge ever," with a drawing of a gavel surrounded by hearts. "You tell Emma that she made my day with this card, and Sarah, you tell yourself something too. You're a good mother. You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. Not a single person in that courtroom judged you for it. We judged the system that failed you. Share this if you believe good people can make bad situations better." Sarah nodded. Afraid if she spoke, she'd start crying again, and she'd done enough of that for a lifetime. But Judge Morrison wasn't done. "I want you to know something," the judge continued. "Your case changed me. I've been doing this job for over 20 years. I thought I'd seen everything, but your case reminded me why I became a judge in the first place. Not to punish people, not to process cases like paperwork, but to find the truth. To do justice, real justice, which sometimes means looking deeper than the surface. You reminded me to trust my instincts. So thank you." "I should be thanking you," Sarah protested. "We can thank each other," Judge Morrison said. "That's allowed." They shook hands, and then on impulse, Sarah pulled the judge into a brief hug. It was probably inappropriate. It definitely wasn't protocol. But Judge Morrison hugged her back, and sometimes the rules need to bend for human connection. As Sarah left the courthouse that day, she stood on the steps where Judge Morrison had given that interview months ago. She looked up at the building, at the symbol of justice carved above the doors, and felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a very long time. The nightmare was over. She'd been to hell and back. She'd faced cancer, arrest, the possibility of losing her daughter, betrayal from family, and a system that almost destroyed her. But she'd survived. Emma had survived. They were still together, still a family, still fighting. Hit that like button if you believe survivors are the strongest people on earth. 1 year after that day in Courtroom 4B, Sarah Chen was back at work full-time at Memorial Hermann Hospital. Her hair had grown back, thicker than before. The scans every 3 months continued to come back clear. She'd been promoted to charge nurse on her floor, recognition of her dedication and skill that had never wavered even through her darkest days. Emma was 8 now, thriving in 3rd grade. She'd written a story for a school assignment called My Hero Mom that made Sarah cry happy tears. The teacher had submitted it to a local writing contest, and it won 2nd place. The story talked about a mom who fought a monster called cancer and won because she had love as her superpower. "Is that too cheesy?" Emma had asked when she showed Sarah the story. "It's perfect," Sarah had said. "Absolutely perfect." The volunteers from Chemo Angels had become real friends. Patricia Williams and her family had become like extended family. Emma called her Aunt Trish and went to her house for sleepovers. The other nurses from the hospital formed a support circle that was still active, even after Sarah no longer needed emergency help. Dorothy Weston, the neighbor who'd called 911 that day, had apologized profusely once she learned the whole story. She and Sarah had talked for hours, and Dorothy had cried almost as much as Sarah. Now she was Emma's regular babysitter when Sarah had to work night shifts. She never charged money, saying it was her way of making amends for almost destroying a family, though Sarah always left cash anyway. "You didn't do anything wrong," Sarah had told her. "You saw a child who might be in danger and you called for help. That's what you're supposed to do. You couldn't have known the whole story. Drop a comment about a time someone surprised you with kindness." Sandy Chen had served 1 year of her 3-year sentence and would be eligible for parole in another year. Sarah had thought long and hard about whether she'd oppose the parole. In the end, she decided she wouldn't. Not because she'd forgiven Sandy, that was still a work in progress, but because holding on to hate was exhausting and Sarah had better things to do with her energy. "I hope she gets better," Sarah told Emma when her daughter asked about the aunt who wasn't really an aunt. "I hope she learns from this. I hope she becomes a better person. But we don't need to have her in our lives." "I don't want her in our lives," Emma said firmly. "She was mean to you." "She was," Sarah agreed. "But people can change. Maybe she will, maybe she won't. Either way, we're going to be okay." Kevin Frost, the maintenance worker who'd lied for Sandy, had actually turned his life around. He'd written Sarah a letter from his community service assignment, apologizing and explaining that he'd been desperate for money and made a terrible choice. Sarah had written back, a brief note saying she appreciated the apology and wished him well. Sometimes people made bad choices. Sometimes they learned from them. The system changes Judge Morrison had advocated for had actually happened. The emergency childcare assistance waiting period was now 48 hours, and the funding had tripled. 3 other hospitals in the Houston area had started programs similar to Chemo Angels, specifically designed to help parents undergoing cancer treatment. The local news had done a follow-up story about Sarah's case and the changes it had sparked. Share this video if you believe one voice can start a movement. On the 1-year anniversary of that day in court, Sarah received an invitation in the mail. Judge Caroline Morrison was being honored by the Texas Bar Association for her advocacy work on behalf of parents in crisis. The ceremony was in Austin, black tie optional, and Sarah Chen was invited as an honored guest. Sarah almost didn't go. Austin was 3 hours away. She'd have to take time off work, find someone to watch Emma, buy a dress she couldn't really afford. But then she thought about everything Judge Morrison had done for her, and she knew she had to be there. The ceremony was held in a grand ballroom with chandeliers and waiters passing champagne. Sarah felt out of place in her $89 department store dress among all the lawyers in their designer suits. But when Judge Morrison took the stage to accept her award, she scanned the crowd and found Sarah's face, and she smiled. In her acceptance speech, Judge Morrison told the story. Not naming names, respecting privacy, but telling the story of a mother who'd faced impossible choices, a system that had failed, a judge who'd trusted her instincts, and the changes that had come from refusing to accept the easy answer. "We don't always get it right," Judge Morrison said to the crowd of judges, lawyers, and legal professionals. "Our system is imperfect because people are imperfect. But we have to keep trying. We have to keep asking questions. We have to remember that behind every case file is a human being with a story. And sometimes, if we're willing to dig a little deeper, we find that the truth is far more complex than it first appeared." The room erupted in applause, but Judge Morrison held up her hand. "There's someone here tonight who taught me more about justice than 20 years on the bench. She taught me about courage, about making impossible choices, about fighting for your family against all odds. Sarah, would you stand up?" Quote, "Subscribe right now because this moment is everything." Sarah stood on shaking legs, her face flushing as hundreds of people turned to look at her. Judge Morrison continued, "Sarah Chen faced a crisis that would have broken most people. She faced cancer, arrest, the possibility of losing her child, and betrayal, and she survived all of it with grace and determination. She's cancer-free now, back at work, saving lives as a nurse, raising her beautiful daughter, and living proof that the system can work when we're willing to fight for what's right. Sarah, thank you for trusting me to find the truth. Thank you for being here tonight. You're an inspiration." The applause was deafening. Sarah couldn't stop the tears, but this time she didn't care. Let them see her cry. Let them see her vulnerability and her strength all mixed together. This was what surviving looked like. After the ceremony, people kept coming up to Sarah to shake her hand, to tell her their own stories of times when the system had failed them or saved them. She met lawyers who were working on reform legislation, judges who'd been inspired to question cases more thoroughly, social workers who were fighting for more funding for family assistance programs. "You started something," one woman told her. "Your case opened eyes. Made people realize we can do better." Drop a comment if you believe every person has the power to make a difference. On the drive back to Houston that night, Emma, asleep in the back seat with her head on a pillow, Sarah thought about everything that had happened in the past year. The fear, the pain, the desperation, the betrayal, but also the kindness, the support, the justice, the healing. She thought about Judge Morrison refusing to accept that guilty plea, about Detective Park digging for the truth, about the volunteers from Chemo Angels and the nurses from work and the neighbor who'd become a friend, about Dr. Ramirez and his gentle honesty, about Emma's resilience and unwavering love. She'd almost lost everything. For a few terrible days, sitting in that jail cell, she'd believed she would lose everything. Her daughter, her freedom, her life. But she'd been given a second chance by a judge who cared enough to ask questions. "We're going to be okay," Sarah whispered into the darkness of the car. "We're going to be more than okay." And they were. 5 years later, Emma Chen would graduate from high school with honors and a full scholarship to the University of Texas. She'd major in criminal justice with a focus on family law. She'd tell anyone who asked that she wanted to be like Judge Morrison, the woman who'd saved her family. Sarah would still be cancer-free, still working as a charge nurse, still making her grandmother's banana bread for people who needed comfort and care. She'd eventually meet someone, a kind radiologist named David, who treated her during her cancer journey and reconnected with her years later. They'd take things slow, both of them having learned that life was too precious to rush but too short to waste. Judge Morrison would continue to fight for system reform, her reputation as a judge who didn't accept easy answers growing with each year. She'd speak at conferences, write articles, mentor young judges, and never forget the case that reminded her why justice mattered. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see more stories of justice, redemption, and hope. But all of that was in the future. On this night, 1 year after the case that changed everything, Sarah Chen drove home with her daughter and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace, gratitude, hope. She'd survived. They'd survived. And that was enough. The next morning, Sarah posted something on social media for the first time in months. It was a photo of her and Emma at the park, both of them smiling at the camera, the golden hour sun making everything look magical. The caption read, "1 year ago today, I thought I'd lost everything. Today I'm reminded that I have everything that matters. Thank you to everyone who fought for us, believed in us, and showed us that kindness still exists in the world. To anyone going through their own impossible situation right now, don't give up. The truth matters. Justice exists, and you are stronger than you know." The post got 3,000 likes and hundreds of comments from people sharing their own stories of survival, of justice, of hope. Sarah read every single one, and with each story she felt the weight of her own experience transform into something else. Purpose. She started speaking at cancer support groups, sharing her story not just of surviving cancer, but of surviving a system that had almost destroyed her. She talked about the importance of asking for help, of advocating for yourself, of never giving up even when everything seemed lost. Like this video if you believe sharing our stories can heal ourselves and others. One woman approached her after a speaking event at MD Anderson. "I'm a single mother," she said quietly. "I just got diagnosed with breast cancer. I have a 5-year-old son. I'm terrified of what happens to him during my treatment. Your story gave me hope that there are options, that people will help, that I don't have to do this alone." Sarah took her hands. "You don't have to do it alone. Let me give you some numbers. Chemo Angels, the hospital social workers, community resources, they exist. They're there for you. And if you need someone to talk to who's been through it, here's my number." She'd given out her number to dozens of scared parents facing cancer and the impossible logistics of treatment while caring for children. She couldn't save everyone, couldn't solve every problem, but she could be the voice that said, "You're not alone. I survived this. You can too." Quote. That was her purpose now, the thing that had come from the ashes of her worst nightmare. She helped people. She gave hope. She made sure no other parent felt as desperate and alone as she'd felt that night when she'd made the impossible choice to leave Emma alone because she had no other option. The system was better now, but it still wasn't perfect. There were still gaps, still parents falling through cracks. But there were also more resources, more awareness, more people like Sarah who'd been through the fire and come out the other side willing to help guide others through. Share this with anyone who's facing an impossible choice right now. On Emma's 9th birthday, Sarah threw a party at their apartment. It was the same apartment where Emma had been found alone that terrible day, but it had been transformed. Fresh paint, new furniture, photos on every wall of Sarah and Emma smiling at various events and milestones. The place looked like a home, felt like a home, was filled with love and light and laughter. 20 kids from Emma's class came, along with Patricia Williams and her family, several nurses from the hospital, Dorothy Weston, even Donald Kemper from CPS, who'd become a friend over the years of check-ins and follow-ups. And in a surprise that made Sarah cry happy tears for the 1,000th time, Judge Caroline Morrison showed up with a wrapped present and a card. "I hope it's okay that I came," Judge Morrison said. "Patricia told me about the party and I wanted to see how Emma was doing." "It's more than okay," Sarah said, hugging her. "Your family." Quote, "They were an unconventional family, this group of people who'd been brought together by crisis and stayed together through choice. But they were family nonetheless." Emma blew out her candles and made a wish. When her mom asked what she'd wished for, Emma said, "I can't tell you or it won't come true, but it's about all of us staying happy and healthy and together forever." "That's a good wish," Sarah said, hugging her daughter close. "The best wish." Subscribe if you believe families are built on love, not just blood. The party wound down, kids getting picked up by parents, adults helping clean up plates and cups and decorations. Judge Morrison helped Sarah carry trash bags to the dumpster outside, and they stood in the parking lot for a moment in the warm evening air. "You've built a good life," Judge Morrison observed. "I'm proud of you." "I'm proud of me too," Sarah said, and meant it. "I survived. We survived. And we're not just surviving anymore, we're thriving." "You are," Judge Morrison agreed. "Emma's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have her. I'm lucky to have you. I'm lucky to be alive." Sarah looked up at the stars starting to appear in the darkening sky. You know what the worst part of cancer was? It wasn't the chemo or the sickness or the pain. It was the fear that Emma would grow up without me, that she'd forget me, that she'd be alone. "She'll never be alone," Judge Morrison said. "You've built a community around her. All those people in there, they love her. They'd take care of her if anything happened. But nothing's gonna happen. You're healthy, you're strong. You're gonna see her graduate, get married, have kids of her own." "I hope so," Sarah said. "I really hope so." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two women who'd been through something extraordinary together and come out the other side changed but whole. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said suddenly. "Why did you push so hard that day? You could have just accepted the plea. It would have been easier. Faster. What made you dig deeper?" Quote, Judge Morrison thought about this. "Honestly, instinct. Something about your eyes. You didn't look guilty. You looked devastated. Guilty people try to justify or minimize. You just looked broken. And when I read your case file, nothing added up. Perfect mother suddenly abandons child to party? It didn't make sense. I've learned to trust when things don't make sense. Drop a comment about a time you trusted your instincts and it changed everything." "I'm glad you trusted your instincts," Sarah said. "You saved us." "You saved yourself," Judge Morrison corrected. "You fought for your daughter every step of the way. You were willing to go to jail to protect her from knowing about your cancer. That's not giving up. That's a mother's love in its purest form. I just made sure the system didn't punish you for it." Quote. They hugged again, and then Judge Morrison headed to her car. As she drove away, Sarah stood in that parking lot and felt the weight of the past years settle into something that felt like wisdom. She'd learned things about herself she'd never wanted to know. How strong she could be, how much she could endure, how love could survive anything. She'd also learned about other people, about kindness from strangers, about systems that could both fail and save you, about judges who cared, about communities that rallied, about the power of one person refusing to accept the easy answer. Back in the apartment, Emma was showing the last few remaining guests her birthday presents. A science kit from Patricia, art supplies from the nurses, books from Dorothy, and from Judge Morrison, a beautiful framed print that said, "Be brave, be kind, be yourself," with an illustration of a little girl with a cape flying over a city. "Judge Morrison said I could be anything I want when I grow up," Emma told her mother. "I told her I want to be a judge like her." "You'd be a great judge," Sarah said, ruffling her daughter's hair. "Or maybe a doctor who fixes cancer so other kids don't almost lose their moms," Emma added thoughtfully. "That would be amazing too." Quote, Share this if you believe kids who overcome hard things grow up to be incredible adults. That night, after everyone had left and Emma was asleep in her bed surrounded by birthday presents, Sarah sat on the couch with a cup of tea and opened her laptop. She'd been writing, documenting everything that had happened. At first, it had been therapeutic, a way to process the trauma. But lately she'd been thinking about turning it into something more. A book, maybe. A resource for other parents facing cancer while trying to care for children. She typed a new section. To the parent reading this who's scared and alone. I see you. I was you. You're stronger than you think. Ask for help. Accept the help that's offered. Trust that there are good people in the world who want to support you. And know that your children are resilient. They need you alive and fighting, even if that fight means making hard choices. Trust yourself. Trust the people trying to help you. And never, ever give up. She saved the document and closed the laptop. Tomorrow she'd reach out to some publishers, see if anyone was interested in a memoir about surviving cancer and the justice system simultaneously. But tonight, she was just going to sit in her quiet apartment and be grateful for every moment of peace. Sarah checked on Emma one more time before bed. Her daughter was sprawled across her mattress, mouth open, completely at peace in the way only children can be. Sarah kissed her forehead gently. "We made it, baby girl," she whispered. "We actually made it." Quote. And they had. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Drop a comment telling us what lesson you're taking from Sarah and Emma's journey. And subscribe, because we share stories of justice, redemption, and hope every single week. Next video, we're covering a case where a homeless veteran stands up to a corrupt landlord, and what happens next will restore your faith in humanity. You won't want to miss it. In a world that often feels cold and uncaring, remember Sarah Chen's story. Remember Judge Morrison's instinct to dig deeper. Remember Emma's unwavering faith in her mother. Remember that the truth matters, that justice is possible, that communities can rally, that love survives. Be the person who asks questions when things don't make sense. Be the person who offers help to someone in crisis. Be the person who fights for what's right even when it's hard. Be the person who trusts their instincts about people and situations. And if you're facing your own impossible situation right now, remember, you're stronger than you know. Ask for help. Accept support. Keep fighting. The truth matters. Justice exists. And you are not alone. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being part of a community that believes in something better. We'll see you in the next one.